right, thank you, Jonathan. Hi, Senator Pitcher, Marguerite, hello everyone. It's wonderful to be in Atlanta. Thank you so much to New Deal. I want to start by +1ing the Beltline, which is around the corner from our hotel entrance. If you have not taken a walk or a jog on it, get out there. It is a beautiful day. And I'm Caitlin Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of Work for America. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps state and local governments recruit and retain the public servants who keep our communities running, the folks we all have the pleasure of working with every day. I want to frame today's conversation around a very simple idea, one that we've heard a bit about so far today, which is if we want to get our government to work, we need to get the right people into the right roles. And even more importantly, we need to support them once they are there. At Work for America, we hear from elected leaders all the time that you cannot successfully campaign on hiring great people or building a high-functioning public sector workforce. These are the sexy issues that I think about all day, but is not necessarily something voters have high on their priority list. However, once you get elected, if you don't have the right people in the right roles, it is impossible to deliver on your big visionary campaign promises. And that is especially true right now. Since the presidential transition, we have seen thousands of federal workers be laid off. These are very deeply experienced, mission-driven public servants, and many of them are not done serving. They're just looking for what's next. One second on what we're doing at Work for America to address that particular piece of the problem before diving into the conversation. Our organization launched a program called Civic Match to help capture this once-in-a-generation talent opportunity. It's based on a very simple idea. We're trying to help keep great public servants in public service by connecting those outgoing federal workers with jobs in local and state governments across the country, and we're fortunate to be working with many of the folks in this room. Since November, we've had 9,000 job seekers apply for Civic Match, which is a bit of a gut punch when you think about what that means for the state of our federal government, but it also means that these are folks who want to keep serving in our communities. We're working with 200 different state and local governments, and we've seen hires across the country in Boston, San Francisco, Kansas City, Nashville, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and hopefully we'll get some great folks to come work for everyone in this room. So this is really just proof that the talent is out there and ready to serve. But attracting great talent is only half the battle, and we want to talk about the harder question today, which is how do we keep them once folks are in these roles? Because the truth is that our public sector isn't always set up to support the people in it, whether that's staff who are trying to raise families on part-time pay, or elected officials juggling caregiving, low compensation, and little support. So for strong public sector teams, we have to move beyond just hiring. So today, let's talk about how do we reduce the barriers to public service, how we make it easier, especially for women and caregivers, to step into elected leadership and stay, and how we create the conditions that let local leaders govern effectively and deliver for their communities. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Senator Pitcher and Marguerite. Let's go ahead and dive in. And Senator Pitcher, I'm going to start with you. Based on your experience in the Utah State Legislature, can you speak a little bit to some of the structural and cultural barriers that you have seen that make it hard in particular for women and caregivers to enter and stay in public office? And I know you've done quite a bit to address these challenges, so would love to hear about that as well.
I do. There we go. There. Yeah, it's such a great question, and you know, it's hard to not answer that question without acknowledging the religious influence in my state, in the state of Utah. We're very predominantly, maybe not as much anymore, but still predominantly Mormon community, and there's been sort of this traditional message that women are caregivers, women should stay at home, and it's taken us some time to sort of overcome that and find ways to bring women into public office. So I think that has something to do with it. But I also think there's some really great data that talks about women and men and the ways that they look at job opportunities and when they apply. And the data traditionally shows that men will apply even when they meet fewer of the qualifications or the requirements of that job than women. I think that probably spills over to public service as well. And so those are some of the barriers I think perception is also one of those things. It's hard to be something you don't really see. And if you look at the Utah State Legislature, I think just probably 25% of us are women. So that's tough. But I do think that we're making steps to overcome that. A couple of things that I've worked on to try to address this is my first year in office. Worked on a bill that allowed, all candidates to use public funds, or their campaign funds to go towards childcare and other types of expenses so that they can actually, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And since then, we've had candidates that have been able to take advantage of that in my state. So that was one. I worked on a bill a couple of years ago that creates a infant at work program. This is more for state employees, but allows them to bring their child into work for the first 6 months or until that child is mobile. Started as a pilot program, but really we're aiming to try to expand that. And really just, the goal is, we look at just the state and the public sector in Utah. My colleagues aren't very receptive to mandates on the private sector, but the goal is to try to change the perception and show what it means to be a working mom or a young parent in the state of Utah.
I love it. Thank you. Zooming out a little bit with a more national lens beyond the state of Utah, Marguerite, your work has highlighted how state legislators are doing incredibly complex work and often have part-time or no pay, no staff, and limited infrastructure. So can you speak to some of the things that will help professionalize and support these elected officials so that they can govern effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to what the senator mentioned, there's also things around like proxy voting, commissions to address legislator pay. I know many of the state lawmakers in this room, many of you have multiple other jobs that you have to do in order to also serve as state lawmakers. You are all doing full-time jobs and getting at best part-time pay. If you come from the great state of New Hampshire, you're earning $100 for your legislative session, legislator pay that has not risen since the 1800s. If you look at how legislator pay in particular, if you look at it as it relates to inflation, legislative pay has actually gone down over the past 30 years as opposed to the opposite. So all sorts of things around professionalizing legislatures, things like on-site childcare, but also just, so there's been this increase, and again, I'm speaking from the state legislative perspective, but we've seen an increase, I think, at all levels of government of especially donors getting more and more interested in convincing people to run, right? And that's a great, I should say, my organization also spends a lot of time focusing on getting people to run and helping people win elections. So not to discount that, but think about the return on investment. If you're investing all of this money into getting people to run and win elections, but then there isn't a comparable investment in helping people succeed once they get there. So this is anything from training for elected officials, for some of the basics of how to do the job, especially in part-time roles or semi-professional roles where you're not getting the training that you receive. But it's also things like, it's the whole nuts and bolts. It's things like constituent services. We heard on the last panel. It's helping lawmakers and other elected officials really understand how do you communicate out the impact of the work that you're doing so that your constituents or those that you serve understand what you're doing so that they keep re-electing you, right? So this is not a one-time deal. We want more lawmakers to be able to stay in the profession, to be able to stay in these jobs. But that's also means investing in the supports beyond just the individual lawmaker, but also investing in legislative and public official staff, right? We all know that a lot of times your staff is what makes the difference between you being an effective lawmaker, effective at your job, and not. And so one of the things that we're really seeing is a need for increased investment in training staff. So how to run an effective office, how to handle an influx of things, because lawmakers, especially right now, I think are just dealing with so much more than they have ever had to deal with. Whether that's something as basic as your own personal or physical security, to also having to deal with issues that you weren't actually, you didn't run on, you weren't elected to handle. So things like state lawmakers are dealing with tariffs right now. This is not something that is in the normal purview of a state lawmaker. So how do you deal with this influx? And so providing resources, everything from what you do when you walk in the door to how do you run for leadership? How do you become an excellent committee chair? So just really the whole life cycle for lawmakers.
Yeah, I think understatement of the millennium is that we're living in really complicated times, and our elected leaders are being saddled with many of the things that we're grappling with as a country right now. So Senator Pitcher, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that and how, in your role as an elected leader, you've managed some of these challenges personally and politically that maybe fell on your plate and weren't necessarily on the bingo card when you ran for office. And what's your advice for your peers in the room who are navigating similar challenges?
Yeah, we have such a tremendous job in front of us right now, and especially with everything that's going on at the national level, we are doing more with less. But I think despite sort of these chaotic times and so much instability right now, we're also living through an incredible transformation with AI and all of the tools that provides us. When I flew in last night, I was getting dinner with a friend who actually works for the legal team on the AI team at Google. And we're talking about all of these develops, and even she admitted, even though I work on this team, I don't really use AI. And I don't either. I've used it a little bit in my professional capacity, but there's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for us to really lean into these revolutionary tools to help us do our job in a way that's more efficient, that has access to a breadth of information, and really lean in, meet the moment. I also think that these types of events where we're able to connect and share ideas and experiences are incredibly helpful right now, where things are just different. But I think we need to understand that we need to be adaptable and flexible and rise to the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Gonna go back to the federal workforce crisis for a second, because there is a lot that cities and states can do to step up in this moment and support the workers who often live in your communities and were working for the federal government. We've seen executive orders in Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Mexico, Hawaii, many mayors stepping up, county executives, to really fast-track hiring processes for folks who have been laid off in their community. And so, Marguerite, I'd love for you to talk a little bit to some of the tools in the toolkit that local leaders can be thinking about if they do want to help support the federal workers in their community. What are some of the practical steps they can take to help bring these folks either into their own workforce or other roles within their community?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to governors taking action, we're also seeing state lawmakers who are doing things like something as basic as like passing licensing reciprocity, or bills that remove certain requirements or make the requirements, the job skills that you might have developed as a federal worker, more easily transferable to state and local offices. Honestly, the thing that worries me, in addition to what's happening to federal workers, is what's happening to the pipeline of people to go into public servants. And I know this is something you spend a lot of time thinking about. As I'm seeing in the news things about removing funding for things like Vista and for AmeriCorps and programs that have traditionally served as pipelines. And one of the things, as the governor of Maryland was just on the screen before us, is really thinking about like what state and local officials can do to think about how do you replace those pipelines. One of the things that I love is seeing states like Maryland has a first in nation universal service program, right? So it's thinking about like, how do you get young people, how do you create, how do you restore the civic fabric, right, of our country? And Governor Moore talks a lot about service will save us, but this idea that if we can continue to create pipelines to incentivize students, especially students coming out of like myself, with a lot of student loans, right? Public service matters for people. If we can make public service appealing, we can make public service something that people still want to do. I think that there's a lot that state and local officials can do to create those pipelines and to really fill a gap that I think is being left by the federal government that is going to, it will weaken, it weakens our civic fabric, right? People no longer have or won't have the same kind of experience serving in their communities and being part of the public sector that I think probably for everyone in this room was a really formative part of your own like professional upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I love about what Governor Moore and his team have done in this moment, in addition to partnering with Civic Match to help hire outgoing federal workers, is think about the workforce challenges they have and need to meet, and looking at the opportunities that this moment presents. So they've made efforts to fast-track teacher certification for outgoing federal workers, which has been really impactful because there are a lot of folks coming out of the DOE who want to stay in education, and the ability to fast-track that certification has led to more teachers in the state of Maryland. To the kind of licensing reciprocity, the state of Pennsylvania has actually made it such that if you are part of the federal civil service, your civil service will count towards Pennsylvania's state civil service requirements, We've now seen the New York State Legislature introduce a bill that is similar in nature, which means that folks can enter state service from the federal government at the same level that they were at before. So these are all meaningful, kind of practical actions that state and local leaders can take. And would love for this last question, before we open it up to any questions, to speak to what you were just talking about, Marguerite, around the fact that government really does have a PR problem. And I loved working in local government. It was the time of my life, but often folks in government are seen as kind of bureaucratic or boring. We really need to change that narrative. And so would love to hear from each of you what you think some of the things are that we can do to shift that narrative, and what advice you would give to folks today considering going into public service.
Yeah, I think, we all have the ability now to control our own message in a way that we really didn't before. I mean, with the advancements of technology, on my end, I'm sending out a weekly newsletter, I'm active on social media, and so I think it gives us a tremendous opportunity to try to veer away from the traditional message that government is, there is a lot of bureaucracy to government, and finding ways to control our own message. There are good people that work in government. I mean, outside of all of us in this room, there are good people that find it as a duty and a call to service. I'll never forget, do you remember that New York Times opinion piece that came out during the first Trump administration? It was like an anonymous piece from somebody who worked in the administration and said, I see the issues, but I'm here to prevent him from hitting the big red button, essentially. I was so intrigued by that message, that there are people that understand the challenges and that are there as a call of duty, I think. And so recognizing that there are others that find this duty is key. And then I think finding ways to connect and looking for those moments that inspire. After our last legislative session, I feel like I came out kind of despondent, and it's just a tough session. It's hard to be a Democrat in Utah. But I was very inspired by Cory Booker's 24-plus hour filibuster, and for me it was like such an incredible moment to see him take on such a feat, and it was very inspiring. And so I think looking for those moments of inspiration is key, but also understanding that we ourselves often are those moments for others.
Amazing. Thank you. Marguerite, same question for you.
I think public servants tend to be a humble bunch. And I think it's time to start taking some credit for all of the impact that folks are having, because I think a lot of times what we see is when you look at the numbers about like the percentage of the population who actually doesn't understand what their state lawmaker does, right? Or who don't understand, like they actually may have Medicaid and may be getting their health services through Medicaid or Medicare, but they don't actually know. And they don't actually know what their local public servants, their local electeds, their state electeds are doing to help improve their lives. What they do know is that when they go to the DMV, they don't have a positive experience, right? They have like long lines, but they're not seeing the like positive messaging. So I would love to see electeds and especially state lawmakers really out there talking about like this is how the work matters and this is how the work improves your lives. And doing some more credit claiming for the things that are going well. And that's not to say, to the earlier speaker's point, that we shouldn't acknowledge the things that don't work, right? I don't think any of us could sit here and be like, gosh, government is so perfect and there's just this mystery of like why people don't understand. But I really do think that connecting the work to the impact for people's lives, I think that does matter. And I think it's also a way to help address recruitment problems, right? Like if you want to be a problem solver, if you want to be one of the people who is actually making sure that people get their public benefits, making sure that people have a problem, like if you have a problem, imagine if people knew that it was just their elected officials. They're the problem solvers. They're the ones to call because those people are working for their constituents. So I think being clearer about what those stories are and making sure that voters and constituents understand who the people who are solving their problems really are, I think is an important step.
Yeah. Okay, I'll open it up to any questions. Don't be shy. The one thing I'll add to what Marguerite was just saying is remember that your staff are your greatest advocates. So if everyone who works for you can give a 1-minute pitch on why it rocks to work for your city or county or state, then you're in a really good shape. And if not, that's not great. So start with your staff and make sure that they are not just excited to be working where they're working, but they know how to articulate that and they see themselves as advocates for the organization.
Hey, Jonathan from Michigan. So I spent 20 years working in DC and then had this experience of coming back and watching the state legislature try to figure out how to grapple with big issues. And my observation is like, it's not clear to me that the members and staff who realize like how constrained they are. They don't know what they're missing in terms of staff support and sort of institutional expertise and policy analysis and like all the stuff you sort of took for granted working in a legislature that was dysfunctional but pretty well resourced. Like, do you get the sense that like your colleagues or the legislators around the country that you're talking to, do they realize that there's stuff missing, or do they just think this is what the job is?
I think, I mean, I had the same experience working in DC, and then I moved back to Montana. And boy, in terms of low resource, yeah, I think it really depends. I think a lot of state lawmakers don't have the context because you don't, unless you're connected to a group of individuals like this, where you see cross-state connections. We did a staff training in Pennsylvania, training legislative staffers, and there was like over 100 people who show up. I did the same training in Arizona, and like it was great attendance in terms of people from Arizona showing up. There was like 12 people in the room, and that's for like both chambers. And so I think if you don't know, lawmakers from other states, I don't think you necessarily know what you're missing. But I think just also in general, even people who like, even donors or people who like really, really care about state and local work, I do not think, especially if you're coming from the federal level, I don't think people have any sense that like, oh, lawmakers in this state are making $11,000 a year, and by the way, they're holding down 2 other jobs, and when you call their staff hotline, guess who's answering? It's probably them on their way to like pick up their kid from soccer, and then like in terms of their policy staff, they're probably Googling it after their kid went to bed. Like, people don't understand how low resource some of these environments are, and so then when you actually, and that also ties back to what we were talking about in the beginning of like, if we're talking about like raising legislator pay, and you're up against this massive hill where like people don't understand what their state lawmakers do, they don't understand like that they're delivering for them, they don't understand how much they make, and so why would you want to raise those people's salaries? And so this whole like communication cycle of like explaining the just like the sheer magnitude of what people are dealing with the amount of resources that they have to do this hugely impactful thing, is just, there's a major, major disconnect there.
Senator Pitcher, anything to add to that?
No, I agree. It was very well said.
Here. One more question, I think, in the back. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. Elizabeth Bennett Parker, delegate from Virginia. Thank you all. One exciting thing that I wanted to uplift in Virginia that we just did was we have childcare stipends for legislators during session now, and I will pass that along for hopefully every state to adopt. But I've also, I was following the proxy voting in Congress very closely because I've been working since 2019 in Virginia on sort of remote participation, remote meetings, even just for like our volunteers on advisory boards, both at the local and state level, but now really turning that attention to legislators, recognizing how difficult it is as a mom of a 2-year-old to do this job. And I'm just curious if other states, it's been a while since I looked across all 50 states, but are any other legislatures making progress on sort of proxy or remote voting, particularly for parents and medical conditions?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So Utah, since COVID hit, we built, I think, a really efficient system for voting and connecting during a time when we weren't at the Capitol, and post-COVID, we maintained a lot of that structure in place. And so not only does it help new moms and young parents, but it also helps electeds who live in rural parts of the state and flying up to Salt Lake City for a vote, especially if we're outside of our normal session and we're just there for a day for like an interim meeting. That's tough. And so we have really leaned into that. And I mean, during session, we're all there, but outside of session, people are connecting and voting remote, and it's been, I think, a very positive development. It's also helped us to connect to Utahns as well and increase civic participation in the process. So for us, it's worked very well. It's been a good development.
Marguerite?
I was just going to say, specific to Virginia, happy to connect with you afterwards to share some of the other proxy voting things as well. There are a number of different states who are tackling proxy voting, legislative pay, doing independent commissions, and we're seeing interesting traction. Like South Carolina's is debating something. Montana just did a legislator pay increase. So like we are seeing stuff in the legislative modernization space, but proxy voting in particular, happy to give you like a roundup basically of like what states have tried and what we're seeing work and not work as well.
Amazing. I think that's all the time we have. So thank you so much, Marguerite, Senator Pitcher. Thank you, everyone.